Good morning, gentlemen. So, as you all know, we are tasked here today to come up with a snappy name for the 1920s in the United States.
The Roaring Twenties!
Shh! Now, Craig. Not yet.
It's a good idea.
We'll see. Okay, Craig? Now, what was I saying? Yes, the 1920s in America was a time for a lot of change. Culturally, economically, spiritually, all around, massive moves into the modern world. Which is why I think it should be called the Era of Good Times. An interesting title, but not all of it was good. Fair.
The Roaring Twenties?
No! Pipe down, Craig! You do make a good case, though. Well, after the 18th Amendment passed, the selling and production of alcohol was made illegal. Now, this well-meaning attempt to sober up and clean America morally instead gave a lot of power to smugglers and gangsters, who could now use booze to their power over people, getting a lot of influence. Very true, the 1920s was when the American Mafia was born and gained a serious influence in society. Legal bars called speakeasies dotted the country, and everyone from the trash collector to the chief of police would attend them. The speakeasy era? Well, were the speakeasies the most significant thing that happened? Nope. Well, how about we just go through the important stuff? Alright, so in 1920, the 19th Amendment passed, giving women the right to vote, which seemed to bring about a cultural revolution. Traditional gender roles went out the window, and women started expressing themselves with new fashion, as well as new dance crazes and hobbies. Yep, they went out and partied in speakeasies and did the Charleston to jazz music. Jazz music! Yes, what an important part of the speakeasy pie. Which reminds me of the Harlem Renaissance. Jazz did get its start in New Orleans, but it quickly became an anthem for many Americans. It was jazz that would be performed at these speakeasies, jazz records bought around the United States, and jazz artists like Duke Ellington and Bessie Smith and Louis Armstrong that would become American heroes. Jazz moved north with a lot of black culture during the Great Migration, and in the early 1920s, jazz set up shop in Harlem, New York as a new hub. A Black Pride revolution began with writers, singers, and intellectuals, helping to show that black Americans had nothing holding them back anymore. In some ways, it was kind of the birth of the soon-to-be fully fledged civil rights movement. The Jazz Age, yes, that encompasses jazz, the speakeasies, the Harlem Renaissance, freedom for women. No, that's a good name. But does it cover mass production and consumerism in the 1920s? Yeah, good point. It was an important part of the 1920s.
So, after World War I, the United States had this massive production system that
was due to the brilliance of people like Henry Ford, who turned the assembly line into a production work of art. After the war, these factories stopped making guns and started making cars and vacuums, refrigerators, radios, all of the likes. A growing middle class of consumers made the Model T a very popular ride.
cars changed everything. Everybody had their own set of wheels, right? No longer had to live downtown. Why not move out? This is how suburbs were born.
That brought about a whole new culture for consumers. Banks actually started loaning out money so people could buy more things. Ooh, banks loaning money. That's a really important part of the 1920s. Later. Sure will be. Anyways, this consumerism and scientification of the American intellectualism was really booming in cities, but not so much in smaller towns and farming communities. That culture shift did lead to a pretty interesting court case. Scopes versus the Tennessee Board of Education was a case where John Scopes, a high school teacher in Tennessee, was arrested for teaching evolution in the biology classroom. Ah yes, that case became a weird debate between evolution and creationism. A debate that symbolized the divide in culture in the 1920s between modernism and those who wanted traditional ideals and beliefs to still be important or whatever.
The Roaring Twenties.
For the love of good elevator jazz music, Craig. No!
Okay.
Anything else we have forgotten that we need to discuss as we are trying to come up with a name for the era of this time in history? Heroes.
Batman is my favorite.
Craig, oh my gosh, you are really testing my patience. Anyways, I was saying, Charles Lindbergh flew his Spirit of St. Louis across the Atlantic Ocean. First time in human history that a pilot had flown so far successfully. Important. And Amelia Earhart was the second person to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. Both of these flights were, in the 1920s, equivalent in daring as the first man walking on the moon was. Due to the rise in wages, the middle class started to make more money and had more free time, so they started going to sporting events. These crowds got bigger. Babe Ruth was a sensation, much like Lucky Lindy and Amelia Earhart. Era of heroes? That's okay.
Roaring Twenties.
Craig, we have not taken your idea into consideration, and we're not going to. Come up with something new.
Fine.
Ooh, you know what else was an important part in the 1920s? Tell away. So, the government was pretty hands-off with the economy, which is one reason why the economy started to boom so quickly. However, there were a few issues in politics. President Harding didn't exactly have the best record. Many scandals. None as dramatic as the Teapot Dome scandal. Yeah, remind me how that went down? Well, Teapot Dome was a Navy oil reserve, and some politicians and cabinet members of Harding's presidency decided to sell that land to oil companies who had bribed them. Don't forget the quota system. You remember, some politicians didn't like where certain immigrants were coming from, parts of Europe whose cultures and languages just didn't really mesh well with the United States. And so, this is what we're going to get.
So the government gave him a quota? What's a quota?
The quota system limited the number of immigrants from a certain country per year. Yep, that was a dark time for the United States. The dark 20s? Well, a lot of good happened in the 20s, and a lot of not so good. It was a time in which culture was challenged, changed, and the economy grew. The nation tried to deal with new immigration, had some presidential scandals, and in the end of the decade, the nation began to fall into economic ruin. Yes. You see, banks started handing out more loans than could actually be paid back, and the stock market created this huge investment bubble where the price of shares were way overvalued, and it all came crashing down in 1929. So where does this leave us for naming the era?
The Roaring Twenties!
No! 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 The 1920s was a time of economic and consumeristic expansion, crime rushing the streets, the illegality of alcohol completely making a whole new underground culture. There were racial revolutions, consumerist revolutions, and political scandals. At the end of the 1920s, all that was gained just came crashing to the ground. All these different factors came roaring into the United States all at the same time. So, yeah, the Roaring Twenties is the best idea.